If you work at a site and you're still using Excel spreadsheets and cutting paper checks to patients, what are you doing? It's time to upgrade to Real-Time CTMS, a leading provider of innovative software solutions for clinical trial research sites, site networks, sponsors, and CROs. Real-time systems allow users to manage complex clinical research processes with powerful, user-friendly interfaces that are revolutionizing how research gets done. To get a free demo, visit the company's website at realtime-ctms.com and complete one of the contact forms. Hello and welcome to yet another episode of the Note to File podcast, a collection of interviews, best practices, and candid commentary for clinical research sites. I'm your host, Brad Hightower. Today on the show, we have Adam Walker. He's a passionate biometric subject matter expert with global exposure to the pharmaceutical industry, having held a number of global biometrics leadership roles within both the pharma and the clinical arena. He's also the co-host of the Huxley Morton Podcast, where he speaks to pharma and biotech industry leaders and shares their stories of personal and professional growth. A lot of great clinical research-related guests on that podcast, so I encourage you to go check it out. In this episode, we discuss the value of relationships, growth in the clinical research industry, and the importance of self-awareness. So without further ado, Adam Walker. All right, Adam, thanks so much for coming on today, man. I appreciate it. We've had a lot of back and forth, so I'm happy to finally get you on.
It's great to be here, Brad. Genuinely, I know we've had a lot of conversations over the last few months and lots of interactions, and I think there's an awful lot of connections there, not just on the surface, but beneath the surface as well. We share so many common threads in our careers and in our interests, and I think the manner in which we go about our work in clinical research. So it's great to be here, and thanks for the opportunity.
No, I could not agree more. So I'm going to come right out of the gates like I do with all of my guests here, and everyone's, origin story in clinical research, I think, is very instructive. It's useful. I love to hear about how people kind of got into the field. So tell us a little bit about your background and what brought you into the clinical research world.
Sure. Well, I have always been passionate. As a kid, I was always passionate about medicine. And when I was a very young teenager, I had a skeleton behind my bedroom door. And I was very interested in anatomy, physiology, anything to do with medicine. I didn't really care what it was. And so I went down that route at school and college and followed the sciences. And I was fortunate enough to find a really great course called Pharmaceutical Sciences with an industrial diploma at the University of Greenwich in London. And it was an ideally placed study for me because effectively it really put the opportunity to understand not just medical terminology, medical science, but the intake, the extraction of anything medical, really. There was a lab-based component to it, many hours, not just lecturing, but actually in the labs as well. And there was an industrial placement year. And in that year, I realized what I wanted to do and what I didn't want to do. So I spent the year wearing a lab coat and realized I didn't want to wear a lab coat for the rest of my career. I wanted to get out there and do something much closer to reality. I didn't see myself as a wet chemist, and I had all access. I was working at the university, what is now the University of Greenwich site, but it was actually owned by the Royal Naval College. So they trained naval submariners at the Royal Naval College for many, many years. And so I did this highly top secret investigation into, would you believe, the decomposition of nuclear submarine metal in and around a nuclear reactor. And in those days, they had a nuclear reactor in the middle of Greenwich in London. Now, I don't even know whether it still exists there, and I'm not breaking any laws by telling you this.
Interesting. I was going to say, if you disappear after this podcast, we'll know why.
But I had to sign the Official Secrets Act. And, as I say, I was surrounded by many naval personnel. I had an amazing year there. And what it did for me was when I went back for my final year at university, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. And that was to get as close as I could to whatever medical information and medical data and anything to do with medicine I could. And that's what I really drove myself towards. So after I'd traveled with my wife, who wasn't my wife at the time, we traveled to Israel and we spent 9 months on kibbutz there. When we came back, I started applying for jobs in clinical research, and it was very difficult. And I applied for hundreds and hundreds of roles. Eventually got my first position with a company that was part of Quintiles, which became part of Quintiles. It was bought out by Quintiles. And that was my first real role in clinical research. And it was all to do with clinical data. And this was 25 years ago. My first job. And I was just glad to get the opportunity. It wasn't big bucks. It was just the opportunity as much as anything. And I just learned and learned and learned. And That's never changed. I'm always learning. I'm always doing new things. And so over the years, I've worked for numerous big CROs, big pharma, small CROs, biotechs, and I've traveled extensively with those jobs wherever they've been. And over the last 6-7 years, I've been an independent consultant applying many of those learnings to real life situations, whether it be building systems, implementing SOP processes, auditing sites, advancing medical technology platforms, coming up with software solutions. All of these activities have really been gained through learning, through doing. And I should also say I had a couple of incredible opportunities along the way, one of which was about 15 years ago, I set up an early phase biometrics unit at a unit in London called Richmond Pharmacology. And there I really had to do everything from the ground up. So that was where I learned it and was overseen by a very diligent principal investigator who I reported into. And I built a team, functions, SOPs, installed and validated systems. And that really has defined the career that I've had thereafter, because if you can cut it in early phase, you can cut it anywhere. And ultimately, that has really defined the career that I've had thereafter.
Right. I think I say this a lot. I think that's the beauty of the industry we work in, is that there's just a breadth of opportunity depending on where your interest lies. So, it's great. I wasn't as lucky to sort of know what I wanted to do and what I didn't want to do quite so early on. But yeah. I think that's what a lot of people find in clinical research. Again, once you get in, is that, yeah, if you want to wear a lab coat, you can go that side of the road, so to speak. If you like, clinical interaction, you have that at your disposal. If you Absolutely. Like administrative and business side, there's customer service, there's sales, there's marketing, there's just about everything, kind of all wrapped up in together in the science of what we do. So again, I think that's why it's such a sort of beautiful field that, once you get in, you really have a lot of room to run. The opportunities are just ridiculous once you're within and you kind of see what's under the hood, so to speak.
Absolutely. The only limitation is one's own areas of interest and enthusiasm for learning. And if you are the kind of person who wants to continue to learn, to continue to change and develop and enhance your skills, then you'll fly in clinical research, because it's changing all the time. As we said just before we came on air, the world is a very crazy place right now. It's changing literally on a daily basis. Clinical research and life science is absolutely pivotal to everything that everyone is experienced and living through now. The largest clinical trial that there ever was, we are living through it today.
Yeah.
So if you are not interested in your industry right now, you are never going to be interested. That's the bottom line.
No, that's 100% true. And obviously we're, seeing all kinds of other changes in, decentralized trials, which is sort of the buzzword I'm sick of hearing. I know that's not fair to the concept, but, again, there's just, it's creating so many unforeseen opportunities, I think. You see that there's hundreds of companies competing in this space right now. And I still feel like there's probably a lot of niche areas that haven't even been touched on yet. And as that continues to propagate, there's going to be more and more opportunities. So it's a crazy, crazy time. And I know that you guys talk to a lot of people on the Huxley Morton podcast, which is how we hooked up originally. I'm kind of curious to hear the origins or a little bit more about that as well.
Sure. Well, James Fowle, who first started the Huxley Morton podcast, and he is Huxley Morton. He is the life science recruitment company that is Huxley Morton. He interviewed me just over a year ago for the first time, and I think I was one of the first people to be interviewed on there. And I thoroughly enjoyed the opportunity because I love podcasts. I love this medium. I think it's an incredible medium. It works on so many levels, and you don't have to be necessarily sat in front of a television, or you can do it when you're walking your dogs. You can do it when you're out and about, sat in the car, traveling, sat in a traffic jam. It doesn't matter. There's always a time for a pod. You can't sleep at night. There's a pod. There's a pod for everything. Right. There is literally a pod for everything. And he interviewed me, I think it was October, November of last year. And then I started following and listening to some of the conversations that he was having with other life science leaders. And I was fascinated, not just in the conversations that were happening, but perhaps the things that weren't being asked. And I felt there were many questions out there that I would like to have asked had I been in the room with him. So I made contact with him again, and I just said, listen, James, I think if you'd like me to co-host for a little while, I'd love to be in the virtual room with you. I'd love to ask the questions, the so what's, those little hooks and clues that people leave out there when they're talking, and when they're mentioning various different terminologies and phrases that perhaps if you're not embedded in this industry, you don't get, that pass you by, that go over your head. And it's not that I profess to know it all. I certainly don't, but I certainly have a very active interest in this industry. And there were many questions I wanted to ask those life science leaders that weren't asked. And so I've been asking those questions for the last year since I've been involved. And I'm loving the opportunity. It's a tremendous platform. As you know, podcasting is just a wonderful platform. And we have been very fortunate to have had some incredibly interesting people, including yourself. And this is how it tends to go. You find someone you connect with, you like and hear their story, and it becomes a reciprocal thing. And we all share this kind of common passion. This is what I find. Doesn't matter who I speak to on the podcast or in all the work that I do, everyone seems to share this common drive, which is just to do something for the greater good. That's what gets me out of bed every morning. And I believe that 99% of the people that I work with, that's the case as well. We're all in this industry to give something back, whether it's because we've got our own personal story, perhaps because we've had medication that's changed our lives, or because our family may have been improved because of their experience of medical health. Certainly, that's my backstory. My dear father had a stroke 13 years ago, and it was a catastrophic stroke. He's still alive today, and that's only because of the great medical care and the great medical support he's had over the years. In addition, dare I say it, to my dear mother, who has been his primary carer for that entire time. And when you see that and feel it and experience it every single day, and I don't see him every single day. I see him very regularly. I live very close to my parents, and I am very close to my parents. The point is that medicine makes an incredible impact, and that can be healthcare support, that can be occupational therapy, it can be simple things like putting in a simple handrail next to some steps. It can be a stick. Last week they had a little driveway added to the front of the house just to get my dad in and out of a car easier. It's those simple, small adaptations that keep him out of hospital, that keep him safe, and that mean that my mum doesn't have to overburden herself with regards to her own physical well-being, because the carer is often forgotten about. And that's what I try and do as much as I can, is to support my parents in that capacity. So medicine has an incredible part to play in really making a difference. And as I say, that can be a medical intervention, or it can be something as simple as an occupational therapy type implementation. And as I say, we've all got a story, and we've all got our own personal experiences of it.
Yeah, and you're 100% right. Well, at the very least, look, none of us are going to make it out of here untouched by health or medical issues. Again, maybe even if you're not directly affected, we all know people affected by different medical issues and health problems. So really, it's in everyone's best interest that we can make this process more efficient and function better, as well as we can. It's going to serve us all. And again, this is where it's exciting time. So, I know DCT gets bandied about a lot. I'm always curious about people's kind of initial take as to do you foresee, the advent and, I guess continuation of all these DCT solutions? Is that going to be the truly disruptive force it's sort of being pitched as, or is it sort of a lot of smoke and mirrors right now, or maybe, as I think, probably somewhere in between the two?
I think you're right. I think there is an in between there. There is a place certainly for DCT, for decentralized trials. And I think over the last 2 years, it's been fast forwarded because there has been not just an adaptation or an adoption of that software and the technology, but actually the investment has driven technology as much as the technology has driven investment.
No, that's an amazing point. And I'm wondering how much it's like the startup culture really peeking its way into clinical trials. And I've talked to a lot of these companies. It's pretty clear to me they may have a crap load of money. They don't really have it figured out.
No.
Right?
They don't.
They're still working on it.
They absolutely don't. And the point of that is why there is a role for you and I in this industry. As externals come in with their big, deep pockets, they're looking for experts. They're looking for people who can come to the table with the solutions, but understanding the challenges that happen in clinical research. It's not just about going out and recruiting people who are willing to take on an experimental drug. for example, in an early phase setting, in a healthy volunteer setting. It's also about identifying those patient populations 10, 15, 20 years down the line who've been taking these medications, and they have really important real world data that we can learn from as well. So it's the whole continuum of really the beginning of the entry of those drugs into human beings, as much as what happens over a period of time. There are so many things that we don't know about vaccines, for example. COVID vaccines, we've been talking about them all the time at the moment. Everyone, if they choose to have them, has been, certainly in the modern world, has been offered them, and we are living through that experience right now. Now, we don't know, because we don't have long-term safety information, particularly around how that may pan out.
Right.
And yet, the technology is so well proven that every time there is a variant, they can just literally crank the shaft a little bit and change it, and change the protein spikes, and hey presto, we're good to go again. Now, that's an incredible place to be. That really is a genuinely incredible place to be, because, as I'm sure you and I have spoken about before, I'd only ever worked on clinical trials where drugs had come to market in 10 plus years. And when people said to me about, a vaccine being in people's arms within 2 or 3 years, I said, I think we're going to be here for a long time. I can't see that.
Right.
And here's what happened. R&D, academia, and pharmaceutical companies put their heads together and properly developed something spectacular in an incredible timescale that we've never seen before. And within 1 year, the first experience of coronavirus in Wuhan, people were having jabs in their arms. Now, that is absolutely something special, isn't it?
No, it's true. It's wild. And I was the same way. When I heard those timelines, I was like, there's no way. This is going to be down the road. We're going to be dealing with this for quite some time. So, it's certainly spectacular. There's obviously a cascade of other, confounding issues around that. But again, where else would you want to work, whether than within this industry?
I feel absolutely honored to have the opportunity to do the work that I'm doing today. And I regularly speak to my alumni, University of Greenwich. A couple of weeks ago, I gave a presentation to students going through the same degree path as me and masters in pharmaceutical sciences. And I was telling my own story. And I tell you what, the kids that are coming out of universities now, they just want to be there. They want to be involved in what we're doing every single day. I don't take any of that for granted. I am just very fortunate that I spent the last 25 years doing this, so that I can be, that expert that I think I've become in this particular field, because it's been learned through doing, through hands-on, real effort at the coalface. There's no two ways about it. This is a tough career. If you choose it, you got to roll your sleeves up. You need to learn, and you need to work extremely hard. It's a relatively small industry, and people remember you for good, but they also remember you for the bad. So if you leave a mess behind you, no one's going to employ you, and certainly no one's going to come looking for you. And I've taken that principle with me throughout my career to not just leave a good legacy behind me, but also really embody professionalism and delivery every single day and make the strongest connections. I genuinely make very strong connections with people, because I like to work with good people, and I think good people like to work with me, because I value communication, I value openness, and I do not play political games. And therefore, if I say I'm going to do something, that's absolutely what I do. And that's professional or personal. It's consistent. There is no difference. If you know me as a person, as a friend, I'm exactly the same as I am as a professional. And I hope that all of my friends, family would say exactly that. There is a continuity of personality that runs through every thread of what I do and why I do it.
And I think very much, as the saying goes, like attracts like. I mean, a large part of that is putting yourself out there so that, that can come back to you. And I think that's something that it's getting more prevalent in our field. We're starting to see a lot more people be, subject matter experts, content creators, influencers, whatever you want to call people sort of in the space. So I think that's a very interesting. I also think it's very interesting, your relationship with University of Greenwich, that now we're starting to really see people who are setting out to work in clinical trial or clinical research space, as to where in my just conversations, I feel like that's was super uncommon in the past. I mean, it's something people tend to sort of fall into through a variety of ways, but not many people are like, and I never was like, I'm going to go work in clinical trials. That was never even a possibility in my mind until I stumbled into it. So I have to applaud you for that, because I think that's the future, bringing more talent and more creativity and, again, just overall new blood into what we do.
I'm absolutely passionate about that, and without exception, I always give back. And to that point, again, over the last 18 months, I've been working with a former student from the University of Greenwich, a wonderful young man called Anthony, and he's from Ecuador. And I was put in touch with him through the University of Greenwich alumni, and we have been working together and have developed quite a strong friendship and alignment over the last 18 months, to the point at which 6 months ago he secured his first job in the UK with an R&D company based near London. He lives in London now, and he's doing an incredible job. He is one of the smartest students I've ever come across, and his backstory is phenomenal. And from the get-go, I knew he was someone I wanted to work with and I wanted to support and really, really make a difference to. Now, I've never come across anyone who has had that drive like me until I met him, actually. And bear in mind, this guy comes from Ecuador, okay? So he's working and studying and living in the UK. He's thousands of miles away from his family. He's got an incredible backstory, let me tell you. Now, we only met each other in person for the first time 3 months ago in London. And it really blew my mind. I mean, just blew my mind. And I had to actually pinch myself to see what I was experiencing, because all we'd ever done was spoken on WhatsApp and Zoom and Teams. And we chatted and we developed his CV and we did the applications together. And we just walked and talked through the principles. You know, we did interview training techniques. I said, they will ask you this, be ready for that. Why have you come to the UK? Why are you learning here? He spent 4 years in this country as a student. Now, that's no mean feat away from his family.
Right.
His backstory is fascinating because both his parents, would you believe, set up their own pharmaceutical companies in Ecuador, where Ecuador is nothing like what we would experience here. Now, he's got an incredible backstory, but why am I telling you this? Because I just think it's fascinating, and it just demonstrates exactly why we need to bring this great talent into this wonderful industry of ours. The people that are coming into this industry now are doing it because they want to participate and they want to give something back themselves. You know, of course they want a career and of course they want to earn money and they want to put a roof over their head, but they're doing it for the right reasons. And no one goes into education and higher education these days unless, because they're paying for it, they're not going to be messing around. They're doing it for the right reasons.
Right.
Now, when I studied 25 years ago, you could get a degree in the UK, and actually it didn't cost you anything. Now, most students will leave university in the UK with debts of probably between $75,000 and $100,000. I don't know how that equates to the US equivalent, but certainly you have to pay fees, you have to pay for everything. Nothing is given to you by the government in this country anymore. So you're not going to waste your time on $100,000. It's not the easy ride it once was.
Right. Well, and that's where I think we're going to see some real crazy growth and ingenuity over the next 10 years or so, because, again, it's attracting that talent now directly rather than, maybe as sort of a byproduct instead. So I think that'll be really interesting to see. And again, kudos to you for helping sort of bridge that gap where I think that's maybe hasn't always been such an area of focus. So I love that.
As I say, I get as much pleasure from it in seeing people joining this wonderful industry of ours as I do. It's not for any personal gain whatsoever. And I also want to demonstrate that to my own kids. Do you see what I mean? I want to set the best possible example to them. This is what good people do. They give something back to the industry that has supported them and served them throughout their lives. And my son is 17, my daughter is 18. They're both in higher education now. They see what I'm doing, the efforts that I go to every single day in order to provide for them, provide for my wife, and, give us all a good quality of life. And they see it doesn't just happen. Jobs don't just land on your lap, and you don't just get a paycheck. And as a consultant, as you will know as much as I do, if people don't get on with you and they don't want to work with you, they won't pay you. And they certainly won't employ you and extend your contracts beyond, let's say, a 3, 6, 9 month window. It just doesn't happen. So you've got to be absolutely on point every single day. You've got to deliver and be the best version of yourself every single day. And that's what I try and do.
No, I could not agree more. And to that point, just shift gears a little bit. Another question I like to throw out is, I talk to so many people, successful people. I'm really curious to know what sorts of resources you use to help you, be the best that you can be. It's, a book, software, podcast, a soft skill, anything. It doesn't have to be research related, but I'm always curious to, sort of crowdsource people's success, if you will, sort of get ideas.
Absolutely. I listen and learn from other people, because I think if you don't listen and learn from the best, then you can't be the best. And there are a number of podcasts that I listen to when I'm walking my dogs and when I'm out and about. There are a number of them. One in the UK, which I'm particularly fond of, is called the High Performance Podcast. And it genuinely is talking to high performance individuals, whether they're business leaders, sports leaders, people in the public eye, people outside of the public eye. They've all got a story, and they've all told their story as to how they got their rags to riches, or what was their adversity that they overcame in order to be that driver, that mover, that motivator, the disruptor. Now, you don't have to be a disruptor to be successful, but you've certainly got to want to do something different to the norm. We could all plow the same lane and be the same. And what I've learned from many of these podcasts, certainly on the High Performance Pod and many others, is people's backstories. What got them out of bed in the morning? What was their biggest challenge that they overcame? What was the adversity that they had to overcome? We've all had it. We've all had adversity. And I'll come back to talk about my own adversity in a moment. But, so there are podcasts. There is another one which I love called How to Fail by Elizabeth Day. She talks to people and asks them their 3 biggest failures. What did you learn from them? What did you do differently? How did they define you? And I'm listening to these things, and it's just absolutely embedding itself in me. We're never the finished article. And if we think we are, we've failed. That's the whole point. If you stop learning, you stop growing. And if you stop growing, you're done. Now, I really do take that principle with me very strongly. And so there are elements of self-help. There is certainly self-awareness, which I think is one of the critical things that anyone has to have in life. You have to have self-awareness. It's not about the ego. It's certainly about showing humility in everything that you do. Always saying thank you. Always saying please. Doing the basics. But one of the things that the High Performance Podcast talks about a lot is world-class basics. Doing the basics to the best of your abilities. Because guess what? You do that and everything else has a compound effect. There is an improvement of compound that happens when you do things properly every single time. It doesn't mean perfect, because perfect is not achievable. We're talking about doing world-class basics, doing the best you can possibly do at any given time, and give it your full attention. If you're on a teleconference at work, don't be looking at your phone. Don't be distracted. Don't be checking your emails. Have full engagement in the virtual room, and show virtual engagement by keeping your screen on and showing that you're looking at that person. That's what we're doing now, isn't it? I know this is a recording, but I'm looking at you as I'm talking to you, and I'm giving you my full attention. And that's what I absolutely do, 100%. The other thing that I do, I take a ton of notes all the time. Notes. And I play them back to people very quickly after the meeting. I will chuck some minutes out, and I will say, here's what we discussed. And these are the actions. And this is what you need to do, and this is what I will do. Happy days, we all go off, and we all take action. And guess what? If people don't do those actions, the next morning, what do? I open up the email. I said, oh, here's what you agreed that we would do yesterday. Have you done them yet? Because I haven't seen them. So it's about having an expectation, setting the expectation and the bar, and then delivering to that and reinforcing it and demonstrating it every single time that you will do that to the best of your abilities, and what you expect around those that you're working with are doing the same. You set the highest standards, and then no one can be in there. There is no ambiguity about outcome. You'll give your all.
Right. Yep. No, I don't disagree. I mean, I think, again, it took me much longer to learn than it should have, but simple consistency and discipline can go a really long way, and it doesn't require that much. It doesn't really require anything innate. It's something you can just start doing and practicing immediately. I'm very much a believer in the sort of Kaizen approach of 1% better every day, or whatever the case may be. I mean, you may not start out disruptive, but you can sure as hell end up disruptive if you just keep making that
yes.
small steps in the right direction.
You talk about those small steps. I've heard it called marginal gains. You've heard of marginal gains?
Sure.
So effectively, these are the things that they talk about in Olympic terms, where those micro percentage points, when they're compounded, again, make 5, 10, 15% improvement on the aerodynamics of a bike or the aerodynamics of a Formula One vehicle. The minor things. The fact that a swimmer gets in a pool and wears a hat and shaves their arms and legs because it gives them that minor improvement. These are the minor changes, but actually they have such an enormous compound effect. And what I've realized and recognized and experienced is that the more I've done those things, the better the return. And it's as simple as that. Now, so I've talked about podcasts, but I also, there's a couple of books which I've thoroughly would recommend. One is called Legacy, and it's the story of a rugby team called the All Blacks, the New Zealand All Blacks. They're called, in history, they're called the winningest team in history because they've won more games than any other team. Legacy. It's an incredible book, and it tells the story of how they reinvented themselves from a low point to then being, once again, double world champions over the course of an 8-year period. Now, anyone who can perform, a team that can perform for 8 years at the top of their game and continue to do so and define themselves as the winningest team in history, that's something pretty special. And I love rugby. So rugby is a sport in the UK that we play a lot of. My son plays a lot of it these days. And I support and watch a lot of professional sport. Rugby is one of my favorites. But I've learned a lot from that experience and just reading other people's stories. There are so many business leaders in this country who have genuinely, built something from their garden shed or from their bedroom. They had an idea and they believed in themselves and they just continued to believe in themselves and they didn't stop believing in themselves. They just continued to do that. And one thing I've learned over the last couple of years, through various lockdowns in the UK and around the world, is actually that no one's going to come knocking on your door, genuinely. Whether figuratively or metaphorically, no one is going to come knocking at my door. So I've got to go out there and I've got to make a nuisance of myself and remind people that I exist and that I have a service and a capability that they need to be aware of. And coming back to the Huxley Morton podcast, I had this eureka moment and I just thought, I need to get myself out there. I need to make a difference. And I also need to let people know what I'm doing. And no word of a lie, the interest and traction that has created, both inside the industry, but also outside. There are external factors at play. And some of the conversations have been transformative. Most of them, actually, because as I said to you, we speak to so many incredibly interesting, engaged and motivated individuals that I couldn't have learned many of those things unless I'd had the opportunity. And one thing we've seen more than ever is just the willingness to connect with people across boundaries like never before. You and I, this is a case in point. You're the other side of the world, for goodness sake. We shouldn't be having this conversation. I should have to get on a plane and, and spend days and hours and time zones getting to be where you are. But look, we're at the same place and we're fully engaged, probably more than we would be if we were in the same room.
I mean, it's true. And I think it took me a little while to learn this too, but I think it is amazing the opportunities that will make themselves available to you if you put yourself out there and be in the mix. And again, I think I tell people this, I'm an introverted, quiet kind of guy. If I'm at a party, I'll probably be in the corner, listening to the music or something like that. So it took me, I had to work to put myself out there. But again, once you do it's not even about external reward. Process itself is rewarding because you are learning and growing through the process. But a sort of side effect is, again, all these doors suddenly open for you in ways that you never would have seen otherwise. So, again, it doesn't have to be a podcast or a video. Just be connecting with people the way that, that we're connecting now off tape, so to speak. So
exactly.
Again, I started out as a research assistant. I didn't have a degree. I had to sort of slowly fight through not having any confidence in what I was doing. So I can relate to a certain sense of self-doubt, especially, again, if you're a lower level research person. But I think, if anything, taking away from this conversation, I think people can get out there, do the damn thing. Like you said, nobody's coming to you. Yep. You got to put yourself, you got to be in the game to win, So, but first step is to get off the bench.
Absolutely. And to give you credit, Brad, I work with many people who are similar to you, who by their own definition and by their own admission do not consider themselves to be particularly extrovert. And the point I will make about that is that there is a place for everyone. And sometimes it's just about knowing what your superpower is. We've all got one. We've usually got several. And you can work on those superpowers and you can develop them. And they can become this compendium of skills that just line your jacket every time you rock up to a different situation, personally or professionally. But we've all got them. And I work with many people who, similar to you, don't have a life science degree and feel like they don't actually have a place in this industry. They have this imposter syndrome. And what I say to them, as much as I would say to you, is we all have a value. And it's identifying what that value is to the industry that you're supporting, whether it be clinical research or anything else. It's knowing your value, identifying it, and committing to deliver. And I work alongside so many people and have recruited so many people into this industry who don't have a life science background and who are far better than those that do, because they have never taken anything for granted. They've always continued to learn. The first thing they do is they open up a clinical study protocol and try and digest it and understand it. Primary, secondary objectives, outcomes. What are we trying to do here? What do I need to understand as quickly as possible so that I can get in the room with these people who actually have maybe written these protocols? It's all those kind of fine details. They focus on the detail so that they can then give themselves confidence to be in the room with those individuals. And this is a key.
Yeah, well, and to go back to what you said before, I think, again, learning what your strengths are and refining those and presenting them in a way that, again, gets you in the room. And again, that's a very undervalued, I think, trait. And it goes back to, again, your mention of self-awareness, which I think is not always as common as you would hope. And again, it takes some reflection, some self-reflection, and maybe some deep work to find those sometimes. But you got to be willing to put it in.
It certainly takes work, and I have many friends and colleagues who I genuinely can see from the outside perhaps haven't done that personal work. Now, I've had some life experiences that have really knocked the wind out of me several times. As I mentioned, my dad's stroke 13 years ago coincided with a very, very bad time in my life, and I was very mentally unwell for quite some time, and I had to spend some time in understanding why I was so mentally unwell. And as a result of that, and investing the time and effort in myself and understanding myself, I actually realized what my superpowers were and also how I could come out of that a better person and with better values and understanding what my values were. And I know them now. And when I come across individuals who've also done that kind of self-reflection, doesn't have to be in a clinical setting. You don't have to have a therapist sat in the room. You can be doing it, listening to podcasts. You can be making your own notes. You can just be reflecting on your own day. Keep a journal. Keep a note of what made you feel good, what made you feel low. Did you sleep? Did you take too much alcohol? Did you do something negative? What was it that drove you to feel good, bad, or indifferent? There's always a connection. 100%. There's always a connection. So if you have that kind of self-awareness, I think it puts you on a whole different footing, because that level of connection then that you can make with people is so much deeper. And I was having a conversation with someone, funnily enough, earlier on this week, and we were talking about that going deep thing. I don't do surface. I just don't do surface, as you might gather. We've gone pretty deep, pretty quick. because there's no point. I don't want to stay surface. I need to understand what makes people tick as much as I will share what makes me tick. And I think if you do that and you understand both yourself, but also the people that you're working with, and you have those strong levels of connection, you will be a high performing team. Whether you like it or not, it's going to happen because you're connected on a different level, not just academically, not just scientifically, but actually on a human level.
Right.
And when that connection happens on a human level, that's where the magic happens.
I could not possibly agree more. I love it. Adam, where can people find you online?
Therapy.com. No. I do a lot of my best work on LinkedIn, so they can find me at Adam Walker at LinkedIn. I post quite a lot, personal, professional, advice, all sorts of different bits and pieces. Sometimes people love it, sometimes people hate it, but I will always give you an insight into what my mind is thinking at the time. And I think you've probably been following me long enough to see some of those things that I post.
Yeah, LinkedIn is a real hidden gem. I think I'd say it's not hidden anymore to me, but I've never knew before just how many people, in our field are on LinkedIn having really engaging conversations. And again, if you're listening to this, you probably already are on LinkedIn, but if you're not, get on there, bother Adam.
I would say, over the last couple of years, it has been the thing that has driven the most amount of business for me. I think I'm over 6,000 connections, and I wouldn't claim to know every one of those 6,000 connections. But what I do find is that those personal posts that I put out there seem to have the most incredible interest. I can put a picture of me and my kids doing something at the weekend and a statement of something, and it'll have 5,000 views. And it literally blows my mind because, do you know what? People want to know what's going on in your life.
Sure.
People are interested. And the human side is the thing as much as the professional that we can share. And I've really stepped away from Facebook and other platforms because I just don't get that level of enjoyment from them, to be quite frank. Facebook, someone once said to me a long time ago, was more like a boast book. In other words, look how great my life is. Look how fantastic my family is. Look at me, basically.
Right.
LinkedIn is genuinely my shop front. If I had a shop, that would be it. And I shouldn't say this out loud, but if they actually wanted to charge me a lot of money for it, I would quite happily pay that because I just find it's giving me so many opportunities for people to find me. But also, the Huxley Morton Podcast, we post the links out there every week. I connect with people all the time. Genuinely all the time. People I never knew I would get on with have come to me directly through LinkedIn. And to the listeners out there, if you're not on LinkedIn, you're missing an enormous trick because it is the best social media platform for business that there ever has been, actually.
Nope, I agree 100%. And again, if you're on LinkedIn, you can find Adam there, and I'll put his contact information in our show notes on notefilepodcast.com. Adam, I want to thank you for coming on. I'd love to have you back and go deep into some other topics specifically. So please consider that.
Thank you, Brad. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I would love to continue the conversation at a later point. And thanks again for the opportunity.
Thank you so much for listening to the Note to File podcast. Please make sure and check us out at notefilepodcast.com for previous shows, episode transcripts, show notes, as well as contact information for our guests. You can always reach us for questions, comments, episode ideas, and guest requests at brad@notefilepodcast.com. Thanks again for listening.